All right, world. Happy Friday. Welcome to another edition of our live chat. I'm here with my colleague Charlie. Charlie, how you doing today?
Doing all right, Sam.
All right. Well, we're always trying to mix it up with what we're going to be discussing today. And this is kind of a very interesting story, Charlie. And I think one that's really worth highlighting precisely because it actually hasn't really gotten top billing. I mean, when you're talking about the war in Ukraine, China, US tensions, G20 summit, like obviously going on in the world. This is a story that I think is undercovered, and I'm going to need you to help us out with. So we've had these series of clashes in Syria, in Kurdish Arab disputes. The U.S. seems to be worried. What's going on? Contextualize this for us.
So the big context is about approximately believe a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, the Kurdish Syrian Democratic Forces arrested the leader of the Deir ez-Zor Military Council, which is what was up until that point a component part of the SDF. And the Deir ez-Zor Military Council is Arab-led, and they administer Deir ez-Zor on behalf of the SDF because the SDF is, if not majority, it is at least driven largely by Kurdish interests. And so the SDF, in an effort to have Deir ez-Zor have a more local face to their governance, they have an Arab military council running affairs in Deir ez-Zor. And essentially what happened was the SDF arrested the leader of the DMC, and that triggered clashes between the DMC and the SDF. Triggered about a week's worth of clash, or a week and a half or so worth of clashes that killed 100 people, 90 people, and it saw several several Arab fighters arrested. The most recent development today is that the SDF has granted amnesty to the DMC fighters that they have arrested. So things seem to be de-escalating from that standpoint. But what it does highlight is the U.S. the SDF is a key U.S. counterterrorism partner against the Islamic State, and it is not necessarily a fully unified body 100% of the time. And so that's pretty much what I want to highlight about these latest clashes. The U.S. did express concern during the clashes that it was going to undermine the U.S. counterterrorism mission because of the importance of the SDF's role in providing intelligence to the U.S., guarding prisoners that are Islamic State prisoners, and just in general being a really important force multiplier for the U.S. in terms of the U.S. being able to keep a light footprint in Syria while the SDF can kind of do the heavier lifting. So it seems to have de-escalated for the moment, but the broader ethnic problems are a potential concern.
Yeah, so you're obviously hinting at it here that we do start to see a little, but as you say, I mean, the big concern here is we operate through the SDF to largely keep Islamic State in check. I mean, a threat that I think people were obviously following hourly, a few years ago. Now it's very much in the background. People may even forget that we actually have troops in Syria, and that we still are very much dependent on the SDF to keep ISIS in check. So you say it's de-escalating. So, I guess what's the kind of near-term forecast? But then are we expecting this to happen again? Because this is not the first time that we've seen something similar to this, right?
In the near term, the situation will probably calm down. I mean, will probably calm to the point where the SDF will resume normal. I mean, things will kind of be back to pseudo normal. But the reality is, especially in eastern Syria, it's a multifaceted problem. So Deir ez-Zor in particular is where U.S. forces and Syrian regime forces are relatively close together, and then Islamic State has kind of been able to carve out a one of a better term, a safe haven in the unpopulated desert areas that are kind of between U.S. and Syrian forces. They're kind of in a no man's land, for want of a better term. So the key implication is that things like this could very likely happen again, and probably will happen again, either between the SDF and Arab tribes, or possibly even between the SDF and the regime directly, which would be a nightmare scenario, because that would put U.S. aligned forces directly in conflict with Russian aligned forces. One of the key points for the SDF, and the reason they justified the arrest of the DMC official, was his supposed ties to the regime in Damascus, which the SDF is still not totally on board with normalization as part of being part of the Syrian regime in Damascus. So it's fairly it remains a touchy subject, and so that's probably going to be where we're going to see these points of conflict is over is in this region where these two sides kind of really are up against one another, and where these frictions are going to probably play out. And Deir ez-Zor is also important because it's where Syria's only oil reserves are located. So, and they're currently under SDF control. So, and there was a fairly famous incident 4 years ago now, where U.S. forces actually came into conflict with Wagner personnel in Deir ez-Zor, where the U.S. had to call in airstrikes on Russian personnel. So this is the kind of thing that could escalate relatively quickly in an unforeseen manner.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of interesting, perhaps scary options out here, where we're talking about risk of ISIS having more opportunity to perhaps regrow, potential U.S. Challenges with Russian or pro-Russian forces, even if it's just through proxies. I mean, very interesting, but also scary situations to game out. I mean, for context to our viewers, Charlie and I literally just hopped off a call with our analyst team where we were discussing the idea of what great power competition means for counterterrorism, and that this is actually a real scenario where you have a U.S. kind of proxy that's now distracted by infighting and not focused on the counterterrorism mission, alongside a situation where you have actual Russian forces not so far from here, as well as proxy forces. And how that all plays out in this mix is a little scary, even if we're not focusing on this on a day-to-day basis. So I guess, Charlie, to round things out, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. For the average person that doesn't see the Islamic State as a threat anymore, that isn't paying attention to Syria and these dynamics, fundamentally, why should this be getting more attention? Why do we care?
Well, I think so. There are two reasons why we care. The Islamic State remains a potent threat in Syria, and they remain fairly potent in Iraq as well. So the Islamic State has not gone away. They launched some major attacks in Syria over the past summer, and they also launched an attack in Iraq that actually took out the nation's contributed to the taking out of the nation's power grid for approximately a day. And most recently, the Islamic State successfully ambushed Iraqi counterterrorism forces in northern Iraq and killed a French soldier who was there advising them. So the group remains potent in both Iraq and Syria as a threat. So the distraction itself is a counterterrorism concern, insofar as it gives the Islamic State the ability. It takes a little bit of counterterrorism pressure off of them and allows them to regrow their capabilities and certainly launch more attacks in Syria, which could undermine the very delicate sectarian balance there, as well as potentially in Iraq, which could inflame sectarian tensions there, as well as potentially pose a threat to business operations in certain parts of Iraq, like northern Iraq or around Kirkuk. And then secondarily, there's the great power aspect that we've been talking about, that these are in areas where U.S. forces are in conflict, either with regional great powers like Iran and Turkey, or with international great powers like Russia. So there's that aspect as well, that it could easily, either through mistake or miscalculation, could easily come into conflict there as well. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why these clashes are important, and the ramifications from these clashes go beyond the Syrian theater.
All right. Well, I'm glad to know that you're closely following this, and I know beyond just our conversation that this dynamic is actually a part of the quarterly forecast that we're going to be covering. That'll come out on September the 25th. So this dynamic, all of our other security forecasts across the globe, you'll be able to read then. So for now, Charlie, appreciate you taking the time to give us a little preview of some of the things we're going to be covering. Hope you and the rest of our viewers have a nice weekend.
Thank you, Sam. A pleasure joining you.